Hello, welcome back to 123stitch.com. My name is Wesley. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we are going to be talking about different quilt as you go methods, how the different techniques work, and what that looks like for the average quilter. If you like this video, make sure to go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can see more quilting video content like this in the future. Now, where did the term or method quilt as you go come from? It's very possible that women were using methods like these all the way back in the early days of quilting history. However, it can be difficult to date some of those records and tell whether or not those quilts were constructed block by block, piece by piece, or all together at the end. First, let's dive into what exactly do I mean when I say quilt as you go. What is that exactly? Now, in the modern day quilting vernacular, quilt as you go typically means a method where you join your quilt top, your block, your batting, and sometimes even your backing fabric all together at once. Instead of assembling your entire quilt top, then putting it on top of the batting and the backing and quilting the entire quilt together, it's doing it more piece by piece. This has a lot of pros and allows women to create larger projects on a more domestic sewing machine instead of having to send your quilt out to some kind of long arm machine or even hand quilting it piece by piece. First, I want to talk about the history of what's known as potholder quilts. Now, a potholder quilt, as defined by the New England Quilt Museum, are 12-inch decorative blocks that are then whip-stitched together and then sometimes finished with a decorative stitch on top. Quilt historian named Pamela Weeks purchased one of these quilts that dates back to 1847. This led her on a journey to discover all of the history about potholder quilts and then to create this book, Potholder Patchwork, which is an excellent book that details a lot of the history of potholder quilts. Now, this book is fairly comprehensive. It covers the construction of this quilt style, research into these antique quilts, and even includes some modern day projects that you can complete today. Now, it has quilts ranging from 1838 to the 1970s, with the first quilt dating all the way back to 1838 for someone named Margaret. Now, this is believed to be some kind of inscription quilt. It has dates and references that allow us to pinpoint exactly when this style first began. Now, based on Pamela's research of 151 different completed quilts, as well as 7 sets of individually finished blocks, she was able to find the original location of 120 of these, specifically the majority of them being from the New England area, a lot from Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Now, we can follow the quilting history of these potholder quilts all the way through the American Civil War era, into the 20th century, and then into modern day quilting techniques. As times have changed, so have the various methods and construction of these quilt as you go projects. Now, what are these different methods? Depending on who you ask, you're going to get a wide variety of answers. A lot of quilters have their own unique names and styles for different quilt as you go methods. There's also a lot of different tips, tricks, and advice that you're going to hear from different quilters on the internet. Today, I'm going to be going over a few of these methods that I am the most familiar with. Now, the first method is something that is usually called the join and flip, although you might hear it called by some other names. This is the method that I am the most familiar with, and it typically requires you making a large stack of your quilt top fabric that you're going to be using, your batting, and your backing fabric. You're going to be sewing through all of those layers at once. Typically, you're going to stack them together, sew a 1/4 inch seam along the side, and then you flip part of the fabric out. Now, with the way that you stack the fabric, this allows you to kind of open the quilt block as though it's like pages in a book. I find it to be a really helpful method, and it doesn't require any sashing or joining strips. You can also use this to create blocks using individual pieces of batting. Now, that requires a whole bunch of cutting because you need to be sure that you have the batting, the backing, and the fabric all cut to the same size, but it can be a really good method to use, especially for smaller projects. There's also the self-binding or fun and done method. Now, this method is very closely related to the original potholder quilts because this requires you to bind all of your blocks as you move along and join them together. You basically just cut your backing fabric about 1 inch to 2 inches wider than your batting and your quilt top. You quilt it together. You can go all the way to the edge of your top and your batting fabric. Then you join your backing fabric pieces together for 2 blocks, sew a seam, and then basically you just fold that extra fabric over, creating a little edge. This makes it look almost like a potholder project. You can then join all of these blocks together, creating a finished quilt top. Like I said, there's a whole lot of different methods out there. Those 2 are the ones that I am the most familiar with. However, depending on how you learn the best, you can either search up some other videos here on YouTube to learn more about different methods of this, or some of these books have some really great resources. If you're pretty new to quilting and Quilt As You Go, you can get a pattern like this Squeeze the Day one. Now this makes a great little wall hanging or home decor piece. It includes all of the instructions on how to complete this project. You can also get something like this. Now this is a June Taylor Quilt As You Go kit. Now this comes with the batting. It does not include the fabric, so you will need to buy that separately, but all of the batting is pre-printed with the instructions on it. So you just cut out the batting, follow the instructions, and then you end up with a completed project. This one is for a casserole caddy, which would be perfect if you have a large family meal coming up soon, maybe for Thanksgiving, and you want to bring a dish. This makes it a very easy project to complete. Then also we have these two books here. Now there's a whole bunch of different books out there. Personally, I learn the best from reading and looking at photos of completed projects. So we have this one here, which is Quilt As You Go Made Vintage. They also have like Quilt As You Go Made Modern. And this includes a lot of really great block ideas as well as tips and tricks to complete your projects. And then we have Piece and Quilt As You Go. This includes not just how to complete blocks, but also things like pillows, table runners, all sorts of fun little projects. Also includes things like applique piecing. So this is really great, again, if you're just getting started and you're not entirely sure what to do. Now, I want to just give you some general advice on completing Quilt As You Go projects. There's a lot of different things to take into consideration when choosing what method you want to use and how you want to complete it. The first and probably the most important thing is to figure out what is a manageable size for you to work on at a time. The biggest benefit for Quilt As You Go methods is that you're not trying to quilt a whole entire top at once. You're doing it piece by piece. Now, what those pieces are can vary. You can quilt it just one block at a time. You can put multiple blocks together and do like a large section. You can do a whole row at once. It just kind of depends on what works best for you. Something very important to keep in mind though is you want to work from left to right. You want to be sure that when you're pushing your fabric through your sewing machine, everything is getting bigger this way, not this way. So you don't have to try and shove fabric through the little hole in your machine. So you want to go left to right. That's probably the most important thing to remember. When picking a method, you also want to consider whether or not you want to use sashing or joining strips. Personally, I don't make a lot of quilts with sashing, so the Quilt As You Go methods that I choose don't usually use that. But depending on how you want your seams to look, those can be a really great option. Or you can use something called joining strips, which is kind of similar to sashing, but it works very specifically. And again, it really helps to kind of hide some of the seams. Those are definitely things to keep in mind. Another thing to keep an eye out for when selecting your method is if you want the back of your quilt to match the top. Now, not in terms of fabric or block construction, but in terms of the quilted lines. Some methods will have you quilt your quilt top, your block, and your batting together, but not your backing. And then you add your backing later when you're joining the blocks together. This means that your backing won't have the same quilted lines as your top. Is that something that's important to you, or do you care if your backing matches your top? Personally, I don't think it matters that much. I don't mind if my backing just has fewer lines or fewer seam lines on it. I think that that's perfectly fine, so that's usually one of the methods that I go for. And lastly, what you want to keep in mind is whether the method you have chosen lets you quilt your entire block, or if it recommends that you leave a gap. Now, the self-binding method, as well as methods that recommend using sashing or joining strips, will recommend that you leave a gap between the actual quilted part of your block and your batting and your backing. So that way, when it gets covered by the sashing or the joining strips, you're not cutting off any of your quilted design. So that's definitely something to watch out for as well. Thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope you got to learn a little bit more about the history of Quilt As You Go methods, as well as some different methods that you can use and just some general advice. If you enjoy using Quilt As You Go and you have a specific method that you recommend, make sure to leave it in a comment down below. I'd love to hear all about the different methods that you guys use out there. Like I said, every quilter is just a little bit different. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!